Coming to you from the Spit Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, this is the Spit Sports Show. Remember when pretty much every national reporter pundit was talking about how this was going to be an electric offseason in the NHL with lots of potential moves and offer sheets and cool free agent signings? Well, that hasn't really been the case. Outside of Marner signing with the Vegas Golden Knights and a couple of little roster moves here or there, the offseason has been realistically one of the more quiet summers that we've seen in the hockey world in quite a little bit. But we did get some news recently with the Team Canada Olympic orientation press conference that happened and the questions that were asked to the best player in the world, Connor McDavid. Now, McDavid was obviously at the Team Canada orientation fielding questions as he's breaking news going to make the Team Canada Olympic team. And the story with him going into this season is the fact that he's eligible to sign an extension with the Oilers. He has been since July 1st, and yet there is no extension yet. And he is going into his final year of his current contract with his team. Now, when he was asked about this, he gave the very typical hockey player answer. They're going to take their time. It's a gradual process. But what's interesting to me is the quote that most pundits and outlets have been focusing on is the quote where he said he still has every intention of winning in Edmonton. And that's fair. And obviously, that's must be great news for the Oilers fans to hear. But in my mind, when I listened through this press conference, the more interesting comment was when he was asked if he would prefer to have his deal done before the start of their season against the Flames in October. And I was expecting once this question was answered for him to say, absolutely, I'd like to have it done before the season. I want to minimize all distractions. I want to make sure that the team is focused solely on winning the Stanley Cup. But he didn't say that at first. He said, quote, I'd say all options are on the table, really. As I said, we're going through it. I don't have a preference either way. That isn't necessarily, to me, the cliche answer that you would give if you were 100% planning on re-signing with the Oilers and all you had to figure out was the money, cross the I's, dot the T's. He did say soon after that he wants to be, like I said before, group locked in, avoid all distractions. But he ended that line of thinking again with, we're taking our time with it. So my interpretation of this is it seems like McDavid and his camp are going to be willing to play hardball here with the Oilers. And he obviously has every right to do that, both with his contract situation and the fact that he has really put this Oilers franchise on his back ever since he was drafted first overall in 2015, where people forget, maybe they don't, the Oilers franchise was a flat out joke. They got first overall pick after first overall pick, Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Nail Yakupov, and they still iced, my apologies, one of the worst teams in the NHL year after year. It only took them taking the most generational prospect we've maybe ever seen for the franchise to really start to take a turn. And he said, McDavid did, that his biggest priority when contemplating his next contract revolves around knowing that he has the best chance to win again and again. So if we're going to take him at his word that that is his main priority, obviously there's other factors. He has a family and a wife. The money obviously speaks volumes, but if winning is truly what he wants, then re-signing in Edmonton realistically doesn't make any sense. Now, it makes sense For other pieces of context, which I'll get into in a second, but if we're going to take him straight at his word, which he said at the press conference, win, win, win. Listen, McDavid and Draisaitl each had 33 points for the Oilers during their playoff run last season. The Oilers scored 82 goals total in the playoffs. So 66 out of their 83, McDavid or Draisaitl got a point on this. Now, obviously, some of the Oilers' goals combined with McDavid and Draisaitl, so they're not necessarily unique goals. I understand that. And I researched, trust me, everywhere to find how many unique goals that they accounted for, but for some reason, the stats tracker that I use weren't able to find that. But the two players, from what I could find, generated around 70% of the Oilers' offensive production during their playoff run. Just for context sake, there was not one player on Florida which equated for more than 50% of their offensive production using the same numbers that I used in Edmonton's case. That is not a stable way to move forward as a winning franchise. The playoffs are all about depth scoring, people stepping up, and goaltending, and overall defense. The Darnell Nurse contract is and has been an anchor around this franchise for some time. And although they made a super smart move, in my opinion, getting rid of Evander Kane and all of his contract, not retaining any of it, this offseason, you can't say objectively that the Oilers have gotten better. They lost Connor Brown, who I thought was a instrumental part of their playoff run last year. He's one of the only depth pieces they had that I think they could consistently rely on for 15 minutes a night, 15 minutes. John Klingberg, who I wasn't the biggest fan of, but definitely some talent there that they're losing. Victor Arvidsson, who, again, I think is a pretty solid depth piece. And Corey Perry guarantees you a Stanley Cup Finals appearance every year, and he's not on your team anymore. He went to your division rival, who you end up seeing in the first round practically every year. And when you lose veterans like that, typically the general response is using your prospect pool to start seeing what these guys actually are made of and if they can produce at the NHL level. But somehow, considering how shallow the Oilers are in their NHL team system, they're just as shallow in their prospect pool. The Athletic ranked them as the 31st ranked prospect pool in the entire NHL, with only 3 potential players coming into the team next year, probably only 2. They signed Curtis Lazar, who I think is fine as a top 6 guy in the defensive pairings. I think if he's your 5th or 6th defenseman, that's serviceable. And I actually really like the signing of Mangiapane. I'm primarily a Caps fan. It's a long story there, but I really liked Mangiapane in a bunch of different roles for the Caps. I thought he was personally best at third line center, but I could definitely see him playing second line wing, even giving a little scoring punch to the first line if, the adjustments prohibit that. But the Oilers' issues are all across the roster. Typically, their forward core is solid as they come because of McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins, who's one of the most underrated players in the NHL at this point. But their projected top 6 this year includes Matt Savoy, who was good in the AHL, but he's a big question mark in the pros. There's just no doubt about it. Obviously, he has really good talent. He's an unbelievable skater, but he's only 5'9", and we've seen plenty of AHL prospects before flourish in the minors and then come up to the NHL and not be able to adjust to not only the physicality, which will be an issue at his height, but just the overall pace of the game and how you have to play. The other 2 which are an issue are Podkolzin is projected to be in their top 6, who is as big a boomer bust winger as I can remember. I think he's very lackluster defensively, especially in tighter moments. He's not a guy you want to have on the ice very consistently. And another guy who's projected in their top six is Isaac Howard, who had 19 points at Michigan State last year. Now, he was gross in the World Juniors, like really gross, but we obviously don't know what he's going to be like in the NHL. So their top six, which has been the strength of this team since McDavid and Draisaitl really started going on their playoff runs, I wouldn't say is necessarily a strength anymore. It's not a weakness, but it is filled with a lot of question marks, especially if Nugent Hopkins is going to be playing that third line center role, which is on the board. He's probably going to be on the second line, but if you put him on the second line, you're going to have to put Pods down on the third line or Savoy, and neither of those guys are necessarily third line type players in my head. And going past that, their defensive core outside of Matthias Ekholm and I was going to say Bouchard, but Bouchard in the playoffs is obviously unbelievable. But in the regular season, I think even Oilers fans would admit he leaves a lot to be desired defensively. That defense core is just full of holes. Wallman's decent, but really from top to bottom, it is nothing that you're going to be able to hang your hat on. And their goaltending situation is obviously a complete mess. Stuart Skinner is not the answer, and they're so desperate to the point where they might be attempting to sign Carter Hart, which is a whole other situation that I'm just not going to get into right now because I know I'm going to put my foot in my mouth and piss off somebody. So I'm going to shut up about that. But it's gotten to that point where they are going to be seriously considering bringing him on. The thing that's so crazy about the Oilers is I really think that without McDavid and Draisaitl, this would be a bottom 5 franchise for the last, like, 10 years, because they've given me no reason to not believe that. Again, before McDavid was there, they were a flat out joke, and when I look at the roster and how it's built and how shallow the depth is, I refuse to believe that without McDavid and Draisaitl, in my opinion, going on the greatest run for a duo in the history of hockey for the last 3 years, that the Oilers would constantly be kind of in that Calgary Flames tier of teams where I know the Flames have gotten better recently, and last year with Wolf, they were fighting for a playoff spot, but overall, the Flames have been, a below average franchise, and I think that's about what the Oilers would be, if not worse. Like last year on paper for their playoff runs, they weren't better than any of the teams that they beat. Maybe the Kings. You could argue that they were better than the Kings on paper, but there is no argument at all that 24-man versus 24-man roster, the Oilers, were better than the Knights. You definitely can't make the argument that they were better than the Stars. Again, I know they beat those teams, but top to bottom, core versus core, the Oilers, in my opinion, are on a different tier than those two teams in particular. And then obviously they were on a completely different tier than Florida, who wiped them off the face of the earth in the finals. So, all of that to say, if McDavid's goal is truly to win and win again and again, he should be looking elsewhere. Now, I think Montreal would be awesome. I think Winnipeg would be really, really cool. I think Pittsburgh is kind of an interesting spot to back up Crosby's legacy, kind of like he did for Lemieux. And those three teams all would more than likely have the cap space needed to pay the 16, 17, 18 million dollars or whatever that McDavid is going to command in free agency. Like, I also think somehow Florida or Tampa, Vegas, one of those teams would make it work just because they always seem to, but nobody actually wants that. But if I'm being completely honest, I think him leaving Edmonton without winning a Stanley Cup would be a hindrance to his legacy and how he is remembered in NHL history. And that's not his fault. It's not fair. It's honestly a complete anomaly that this is what this sport comes to, but it just is what it is. All of the players that he is compared to historically won a cup with the team that drafted them. Just go through them. Gretzky did it. Lemieux did it. Orr did it. Howe did it. Richard did it. Lafleur did it. Yager did it. Ovechkin did it. The only exception that I could think of is Ray Bourque. Now, not only do I think McDavid has kind of already eclipsed Bourque legacy-wise in terms of how they're going to be viewed, but Bourque also only left Boston when he had 2 years left of hockey. He only cup chased after he had given everything he possibly could to that franchise. At the point where he went to Colorado, he was obviously still a good player, but not the Ray Bourque Hall of Famer, highest scoring defenseman of all time that we came to know in Boston. If McDavid leaves and wins a cup elsewhere, it would be a big deal. But there would be always not an asterisk, but a yeah, but kind of approach. Now, if he were to win a cup for the Canadiens or the Jets, or let me think of another franchise that's kind of been on the edge. The Flyers or someone like that, then the yeah, but would be a lot smaller and quieter. But definitely if he went to a Carolina or let's think of like another team that's a Kings, for example, if he stays in the West. One of these teams that already kind of has a core set and wins a cup with them, there would definitely be loud whispers about how it doesn't mean as much as it does for some of these other players who won it with their original teams. Personally, I don't think that should be the case. Me as a analyst and pundit, I think that's dumb. I think it's similar to LeBron leaving the Cavs for the first time. That franchise obviously didn't do their job of putting a winning team around him consistently, and so he left. But it only had his return to Cleveland being the thing that made it so the LeBron needs a super team narrative kind of evaporated. I don't know if I put that eloquently, but in Miami, when he won those titles with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, obviously people looked at him as a champion and good job, you won your rings. But there's always a yeah, but you had to leave and bring Dwayne Wade with you, who was one of the best players in the league at the time, and Chris Bosh, and they had a great team around them with Mike Miller. And it was only when he returned to Cleveland, won them a championship, where basically all doubt about LeBron's legacy was poof, gone with the wind. So if we are to believe McDavid that his highest priority is winning and winning over and over again and winning as much as possible, then he should leave Edmonton. But history tells us that decision and the way it will be viewed is a lot more nuanced than that. Me personally, I think he stays. I think he resigns. I think this turns out to be a whole pile of really nothing because Draisaitl, I don't think would have signed his extension without, at the very least, strong indication from his best friend, McDavid, that he will be re-signing and will be back. Now, I don't know that for a fact. Obviously, I can't report it, but that's my intuition. I think he'll end up staying. But if he leaves, I hope he takes into account the potential narrative consequences that will come with it eventually. Because again, throughout all of hockey history, we've never seen a player that great not get it done with their original team. It's not fair. It's just what it is. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I want to know, do you guys think McDavid will end up leaving the Oilers after this season as a free agent? Let me know in the comments below. I'm small enough as to where I can read all comments and love doing so. So drop something down there. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed what you heard. Please subscribe if you really enjoyed it. The Spit Sports Show, just over 400 subscribers. Big things happening on this channel. And as always, I will see you all in the next one. Peace out. Love you guys.